Today I'm speaking with Megan von Fricken. Megan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tim.
It is great to see you again. We did an interview a little over a year ago, and I'll have the link beneath this video for that if anybody wants to check that out later. But I'm so glad to have you back, and it's so cool to have people that are like a repeat guests on the channel, because I feel like it's kind of growing like a community and family almost of the channel of core people that have meant a lot to me, and just that the voices and the passions that you have are coming out so much. So thanks so much for coming back.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been over a year since we last talked, actually.
So much has happened both in both your life and mine. Well, just a quick bio. Megan grew up in Pennsylvania, not too far from where I grew up, but she lived also a few years in Washington State. She's now back in Pennsylvania. Megan is a psychotherapist and a religious recovery coach. She's focused on trauma work, specifically working with people who are deconstructing their faith when they're navigating the intersection of religious harm, family dynamics, and mental health. Her website is religiousharmrecovery.com. She also has an Instagram. It's at religious.harm.recovery. I'll have the links for that all up beneath this video. She can be reached to talk one-on-one in a counseling session, or you could also consider, she has a membership program, which we'll talk about later this hour, but it's a community of people recovering from high control religion. There's also a link for a coupon in the description here of this video, so you can get a discount. And again, I'm just so glad to have you back. Megan, if you could, before we jump into the conversation today, could you just tell us like how your life's been going and any fun hobbies that we didn't talk about last time?
Well, life has been going pretty great, actually. I think the biggest change since you and I last talked is I got remarried this past August. I can't remember. I think we covered this maybe in our last session, but I had been in a purity culture marriage previously. That did not work out because of sexual incompatibility issues. And so I've just been enjoying being in this relationship and being with somebody who grew up unchurched. That's pretty exciting because he doesn't have the same religious trauma I do. So we just enjoy going out on the weekends and being active, hiking, biking, all that kind of thing. So that's what takes up my non-work related time right now.
That's, I haven't thought about that too much, but it is kind of weird because you almost think like if you're single and you've been through religious trauma, you kind of almost want someone who understands the trauma, but in another sense, you kind of want someone that's just going to help you just live your free life without it. It's an interesting thought.
Right. And it's nice to also have somebody to sort of bounce things off of, like, okay, yeah, that's not normal. That wasn't part of your experience. This is definitely related to my culty upbringing. And he's like, yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm so happy for you. So glad you all met. And do you have any new hobbies that we haven't talked about?
I don't know about new hobbies. I've been into crocheting a lot lately, which is not a new hobby. I also got back into sewing. Both of those hearken from my homeschool upbringing, which are very homeschool type activities. And I think I sort of distanced myself from all that for a while, but I've been getting back into it and really enjoying that. So sewing, crocheting in the winter, that's probably the biggest difference since we last talked.
That's awesome. That's fun. Yeah, I was the same thing. I was homeschooled, and I was, even as a guy, I was knitting and crocheting big blankets by the age of 13. So same
Yeah.
culture.
No, you can relate. I think it's also maybe some central Pennsylvania thing, some of that Pennsylvania Dutch influence. I don't know.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, that does make a difference.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of today, what we kind of wanted to talk about was a little bit different. We talked last time through your story. And again, if anybody wants to kind of either later or pause this and come back to this later, but we talked through your story and your history a little bit more in the last interview. But we thought this time we would focus on more of a topic, which is pretty much what I'm going to do with anybody that comes back a second time or a third time. But we're going to focus on the idea of high control religion in the sense that the disconnects that it creates in your body in terms of things like sexuality, emotional repression, and all the things that can come out, not just in terms of trauma and things to think through, but even really tangible ways like chronic illness and pain, and even sadly like autoimmune conditions, all that stuff. And it does seem like there's some connection. So we're kind of dive into some of that today. I thought I would just ask you, maybe sort of as a segue from your story from the last interview to this one, what are some of the earliest ways that you noticed in your life that high control religion was disconnecting you from your own body? And I guess in a sense, how did that shape your understanding of yourself, both physically and emotionally and psychologically?
Mhm. So, I recently published an article to my website about high functioning religious trauma. And I think this really touches on this piece of things because we may not recognize that we have religious trauma because we're so almost over functioning, hyper competent, high achieving, perfectionistic, people pleasing, all of these different things. But what I've noticed really accompanies that is being so in our head, in our cognitive brain, that we're sort of disconnected from everything churning under the surface, which is driving a lot of these high functioning behaviors. And so I've always been high functioning, high achieving, perfectionistic. And I moved through the world really well. Like I did really well, both inside of religion and outside of religion. But it was hard for me to be vulnerable, I guess, about my needs. Relationships were really one sided because it was based a lot around taking care of other people's needs and building security in that relationship by attuning to their emotional states. Meanwhile, not being aware of what was going on, perhaps with my own emotions, or my own trauma, really, that was sort of fueling that. So I'm not somebody who ended up with a chronic physical health condition or anything like that, although I do have clients that have had that experience. I would say I've had a lot of headaches, tension headaches, and some GI issues over the years, which I think are connected. But I think the biggest thing I've noticed is really in that kind of outsourcing of my emotions. Not outsourcing in the sense that I expect other people to care for them, but really not being engaged with my own emotions, but engaging with the emotions of others instead.
Hmm. Do you, bringing it strictly to religion for a second, as you look at some of the teachings that you went through and they were just probably indoctrinated in you from the earliest days, it's like it's easy to look at someone that's physically traumatized. Someone throws you to the ground or someone literally hits you or something, and you go through trauma. It's really easy to connect those dots. As you began to think through your deconstruction process, was there anything that you began to think through that stood out to you in terms of the doctrine that made you think that specifically, like if you were to actually say it in different words, and you can kind of take something to an extreme. Well, I forget what the expression is, but you take something to the extreme, or what is it, ad absurdum, I think it is. But you take something to the extreme, but you're making a point with it. So for example, I like to say on the channel, if you were to look at how Yahweh treats his people, and you were to say, let's put that aside for a second and draw like a metaphorical parallel. If somebody is about to get engaged and this guy is, with this girl, and he gets down on one knee and he's got the ring and he says, does this nice proposal and it's so sweet. I'm going to take care of you and love you. It's going to be wonderful. Will you spend your life with me? And she's about to say yes, but just 1 second, sweetie. And he pauses and says, just wait, don't answer yet. And he runs to the car and he gets out this bat and he says, I really hope you'll say yes, but I just want to make sure we're clear. If you say no, I will beat the shit out of you right now with this bat. Be like, that's not like, that's criminal. You should be in jail for that. And yet when you see that, you're like, that's actually kind of a parallel of what Yahweh's been doing to his people. And the whole blessing and cursing stuff. There's parallel ways with hell of like little kids are afraid of the dark. But then when you think about hell, whether you're thinking of the fire or just the darkness and being alone, the aloneness factor is extreme, where it's like, I can't imagine being alone as a kid, even in a thunderstorm, let alone alone forever and ever and ever, and I never get to see my mommy and daddy again. This separation trauma, like what are some of those things that stood out to you in your journey, and how do you think that affected your personality as you began to realize like that was a driver, even though I thought, oh, it's this loving God who's, he's going to get me, but he loves me. He's going to take care of the get me stuff. But actually the threats truly did shape me.
Well, I'll weave in my own experience, but I'll also speak more broadly because I think I want to kind of answer this in terms of there's three parts to this in a way. So the first part is the teachings that disconnect us from our body by making the body out to be evil or fallen in and of itself. Then there are the teachings about emotions and that emotions aren't to be trusted and the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. And then and this is what you were sort of describing too with the example about the children, is the phobia indoctrination or the fear-based tactics that are used to coerce and control us into certain behaviors or making that profession of faith or whatever. There's consequences if we don't do what we are instructed by the church doctrine to do. So just as a little background, I grew up in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. There were a lot of fear-based teachings. The teaching of hell was a primary teaching. Rapture and end times was a primary teaching. And those were both, very scary, obviously, for children. I remember the Left Behind series came out when I was, I think, 13 is when they started getting published. And I read those and did a rededication of my life because I was fearful that my first confession or repentance at 5 years old just didn't take, maybe. I mean, who knows?
Yep.
So I was very fearful about the rapture, about hell. So if we back it up to teachings about the body in particular, I think you and I have a very similar background in how we were raised, but the body in and of itself is considered just a vessel. And even though I did receive teachings that it is a temple of the Holy Spirit and you're supposed to take care of your body, it was really in a very goal-oriented way that was still all about meeting expectations from the divine, that we were supposed to be healthy and exercise and all of these things. But the problem also with that is then it becomes a source of self-judgment towards your body in a spiritual way. If, for example, you struggle with weight or size or shape, or you have a chronic health condition, which, by the way, you're probably more likely to have a chronic health condition because of these fear-based teachings, or if you're really exhausted. So even though it's sort of like evidence of the fallen nature of your body, and then it becomes a source of self-judgment because you're supposed to be maintaining it in a certain way, but in sort of glory to God, right? So that was, the first thing is sort of disconnecting us from our body as though it's this entity that has to be managed. The second thing is the disconnect from emotions. And I sort of quoted that verse from Jeremiah that the heart is deceitful or desperately wicked or something like that. But I'm sure that you also probably experienced certain emotions that were acceptable in the church versus not acceptable in the church. Like, what was your experience around anger, for example?
I think it was pretty much, for the most part, just straight up linked to the Bible verses that, that anger does not please God, but that there is an appropriate place for righteous anger. So, of course, we're going to fight the culture war. We're going to fight these awful evolutionists. We're going to fight, strongly, but we're always going to recognize that our anger is really, the wrath of God is the only kind of wrath that's ultimately acceptable. And therefore, like that verse says, I will repay, saith the Lord, let him do it in his own time. But you, at the same time, you recognize you're probably like seething a little bit, like, all right, God, fine, I'll let you take care of this, but do it, get out the mob boss stuff and take care of this situation. But it was very much like suppress it.
Yeah, so his anger was sort of churned up against this other, right? Which reinforces those cult tactics of us versus them, the dangers on the outside, and we can have anger towards all of that. That's evil and not of God. But what if you have anger towards your parent, for example, or towards a friend, or towards a religious leader, a youth pastor, or something like that? That is like, no, we do not do that. And you're supposed to exhibit Christ-like love and everything. And so trying to suppress that emotion and put on this Christ-like demeanor, and be accommodating, be loving, even when there's maybe really bad behavior that should be addressed. So now we have to put that anger, put it somewhere under the surface. We're disconnecting from it. We're suppressing it. So that's one emotion. That's a big one for a lot of people. And for myself, I'm still learning how to access my anger. I'm in therapy myself, and I was just talking to my therapist yesterday about this. Like, there's a lot churning under the surface that I feel like it has to find safe outlets almost, because when you store it up for so many years that you're not allowed to have it. And this could be because of church and religion. This could also be family suppression, because some families just aren't comfortable with it. But you have to almost practice accessing it in safe, healthy ways, and letting it move through in kind of a sort of a controlled environment almost.
Yeah, it's amazing too how it connects with depression, where you see it, if you do hide it too long, it doesn't go away. It comes out a different way, usually negatively, whether it's depression or sickness or something with your emotional state. But you can't be basically ignoring yourself, whether it's your emotions, your sexuality. You can't ignore that stuff for too long before it comes. It's going to come back and bite you somehow.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you brought up depression, because this is something that we see a lot, particularly with men, is that their depression will tend to manifest more as anger, irritability, short-temperedness, and frustration, more so than for women. And of course, this is, being kind of speaking through very gendered terminology here. I want to recognize that. But that's also part of patriarchal conditioning, not only in the church, but in our society, where, a lot of men that grew up in the church are very suppressed around their anger too, in the ways that you described. And also it is a bit more of an acceptable emotion for men to have. And so versus maybe sadness or, other classic symptoms of depression, like having a hard time getting out of bed and doing things that need to be done. You're doing the things, but you're like on a really short fuse when you're doing it.
Just curious, when you mentioned, therapy even for yourself, do you find at times that trying to put yourself back in the actual memories themselves is cathartic for you, or is it triggering in a negative sense? Like, if you, for example, I know none of us really journaled a lot when we were really tiny because we didn't have the ability to, but if you could have gone back and watched a video of that time frame, or had a journal and just really relived and thought, oh yeah, I forgot about that, but yeah, that influenced me, and so did that. When you dig that up, does digging it up help you or does it hurt you?
So there is an approach to therapy that specifically supports nervous system recovery. That when you go into a memory, when you do it with a specific type of approach, it can be very therapeutic, because you're actually accessing it in the region of the brain where the trauma is stored, which is in this lower region of the brain. It's a more primitive brain region. And we're not up here in our thinking brain or prefrontal cortex. And so when we do, for example, narrative therapy or a lot of talk therapy, and we're just talking about the memory and we're very much in our prefrontal cortex, it can be very activating, flooding, triggering, and not particularly productive. So for me, I work with a therapist who does EMDR and internal family systems therapy, and those are the therapies I use as well. I also use brain spotting and somatic experiencing. When you use approaches that are specifically oriented towards the nervous system, you're getting at that memory in a body-based way, so that if it's activating the nervous system in terms of physical sensations or emotions or things that may be flooding, you're doing it in a container of safety where you have resources to sort of ground you while you're going through the experience. So you're not just playing through the memory and then that's it, and now you're flooded. You're actually processing the nervous system information that's coming up simultaneously. So that's why it's so effective in eliminating future triggers too. That, if you're going through the world and you experience a trigger, it's activating that old stuff. But if you've moved it through in the safe container, it's not there to trigger anymore. So, and I will say, for me, the memories that I process are more to do with family of origin. And I talk about this a lot in my content, that for a lot of people, their trauma is so interwoven with family of origin stuff because it was their parents who took them to church and enforced these things in the home. And so it's hard to untangle that. I can look back now and know that a lot of those teachings created this high functioning religious trauma for me, which was really harmful in its own way. But in terms of that true trauma, those trauma memories, that's more connected to my family of origin than like teachings about hell or the rapture, because I had somehow channeled it into a way that made me just do more and be better.
Yeah, makes sense. It's been interesting to me. I've found myself going back through a lot of memories more and more in the last year. And I think part of it is because I am a dad of 4 small kids, and I'm trying to think through, like, are there parallels? But also I'm working on a project, a monologue, to basically write a very long letter to my 10-year-old self, to sort of try to say, as if I could go back in time. But did you ever see that movie, The Butterfly Effect, with Ashton Kutcher?
I don't think I've seen that one, no.
He has the ability, like when he looks at an old journal or an old photo, he has the ability to go back with his current adult mind into that moment as a child and to make a small change. And it's an interesting movie because he keeps on trying to make these small changes to fix it, and he fixes that one, but then in the end, he ends up like creating 10 new problems. So he has to go figure out how to keep fixing things, and it just keeps blowing up. But it's an interesting concept. But just if you could go back and not have the butterfly effect happen where you've messed everything else up, but you could actually go back and kind of have a mature conversation with yourself that you could carry through and say, like, look, brace for impact, but these are the things you don't see. You just think you're playing soccer and eating dinner and doing your homework and watching TV. You think that's your life. There's other things, there's programming going on, and you need to realize these are seeds they're poisonous, that are going to blossom into bad things if you don't think through it. And I know that's not reality, it's science fiction in a sense, but you almost wish you could go back and talk to your earlier self. And as much as you can, it is healing to me to do that. I know not everybody probably should go through their memories to that extent. I try to remember and write down everything I possibly can. For me personally, it has been a healing process, but I do think it's really important, whether you go through it in that detail or you just kind of speak generically, to try to almost reparent yourself, to say, whether your parents were really good and just got a few things wrong or they messed up all over the place, like, we all need to kind of reparent ourselves in some way. And it's like, you're not going to get that. And we're not here to, be bitter and bitch constantly about our parents' mistakes. Some of them did the best they could, and that's just the way it's going to be. But to say, still, you've learned some lessons. Hopefully you've got a mature perspective than maybe your parents did, but you can reparent yourself a little bit. And it's a very healing process for me. That makes sense?
So that's really touching on internal family systems, what you're describing there. And we have this concept of reparenting the self and other modalities as well. It's a very attachment-based approach, which I also work from attachment-based. But yeah, it's the idea that you have this sort of core authentic self that is good, that's not bad, as we were instructed to believe, and that there's a wounded younger self that you can go back to through visualization or through writing, whatever works well for you. And you can provide that nurture that younger self didn't get when it was growing up in a high control system. That's been a big part of my healing journey too, is reconnecting with, and you may have multiple younger parts. I mean, you could have a 6-year-old younger self, you could have a 10-year-old, you could have a 14-year-old, that didn't get different things they needed at different times. Yeah. So I think if I could go back and tell a younger version of myself something, I think I would really want to encourage it to not be afraid to explore other perspectives. that was the biggest thing that kept me trapped and isolated for so long, was that I was conditioned to believe our way is the only right way and outside sources are dangerous, and it shut down my critical thinking. And that's what kept me stuck. And it made me fearful of developing friendships and relationships with people outside of the church. I mean, of course, I was homeschooled as well, so I didn't have exposure to other children in the school system or teachers or anything like that. But by the time I was a teenager, I was sort of self-policing myself around who I could and couldn't interact with, could and couldn't date, those kinds of things. I only read faith-based or Christian literature, novels, or nonfiction, all Christian music, all Christian media, all that kind of stuff. And so I wish that my younger self knew, because I have some black sheep as clients. Remember black sheep? I was not a black sheep. But the black sheep were the ones who were doing that stuff still. Like, they were asking the questions. They were making friends with, non-Christians, and they were watching shows like bad TV shows or MTV or whatever. And it helped them to sort of, I think, see the fallacies in the system that we were indoctrinated into. Whereas for me, it took getting into college, even though I went to a Christian college, to be exposed to other viewpoints. And that's what helped me eventually break away, is when I realized, okay, this isn't an absolute like I was taught. There's no way this could be an absolute like I was taught. So, and I have my youngest brother is a teenager right now, and he's sort of being indoctrinated into that system still. And so that is one thing that I'm trying to help him do. Like, and I can't go back and do it for myself, but I can encourage critical thinking in him. So that's kind of healing in a way too.
Yeah, it's going to be heartbreaking, though, to think about what he's going through.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to get another topic from my therapist, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I would love to ask your thoughts and sort of pick your brain about the whole autoimmune disorder stuff or chronic pain and just ways this stuff manifests itself. I had something that I kind of categorize probably related to that, although I don't know for sure. It could have been an OCD thing. But when I was 8, I learned how to make a fraction into a decimal, like 3/4 equals 0.75. The millisecond that my brain learned to do that, I couldn't stop doing math facts all night long. I couldn't sleep for about a year. And the math facts stopped after about a year, but when it was all over, when the math facts stopped, I still couldn't sleep for 25 years. It just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I remember talking to my pastor about it, and he's like, Tim, the Lord gives sleep to his beloved. You have unconfessed sin. And until you confess it, you will not. This is a gift. God is keeping your heart sensitive to sin. Your insomnia is not a curse. It's a blessing of the Holy Spirit.
Wow.
But I later went to moved from Philadelphia to down here to Georgia to a special doctor who cured it in 1 month with no medicine. It was a left brain, right brain thing. But I look back at that stuff and I think I do wonder if it was partially math facts or partially something in my brain saying, you're going through trauma. Now, that's just my story, and I'll save that for me and my therapist and my doctor. But just curious, like, do you see some people that have something in their lives, and it's just like it's almost too clear to ignore the connection? Like, your parents or your church taught you this, and then this happened to you physically. Like, how do you see those connections, and what have you seen in your life or in people that you know?
Well, what's interesting is that I think in most cases that I've seen, it's not a super clear connection. It's this slow peeling back the layers of, okay, we've pursued doctors and we've pursued specialists and we've pursued tests. And now we're starting to look into maybe some of the underlying psychological factors. That's more the path I see for people, because a lot of folks who grow up in these religions, especially the ones that may seem a bit more benign on the surface, they're told and maybe believe going into adulthood that, oh, I had a great childhood, or I came from a good Christian family or whatever. And they're not connecting those fear-based teachings with the chronic GI issues they're having now, for example, or the autoimmune condition they're having now. But I think there's more and more research coming out that shows the connection between trauma and physical conditions or chronic physical pain or like the autoimmune conditions and things like that. So I think that when I'm working with clients when I do an intake, I always ask about physical symptoms and physical issues too, because even the people who are coming to see me maybe aren't even coming because of physical issues, but it's just something that they've learned to live with for many years. And then it's sort of providing some education about that connection. So again, going back to the way trauma is stored in the body, when we think about, and there's a lot we still don't know, but we know that stress causes inflammation. And so chronic inflammation over time can cause all sorts of issues in the body. We also know that the region where emotions and trauma are stored, which is that lower brain region I indicated before, when somebody has chronic pain, that is the area that's being activated by the chronic pain. And chronic pain is different than acute pain and how it registers in the brain. So that's also another connecting component, that when you start to access and release the trauma, or if you have somebody in your world, or you for yourself have a lot of emotion coming up, you might notice that your pain also increases. So when we bring that emotion down or start moving the trauma out of the nervous system, you notice also a simultaneous decrease in pain issues. And it's not to say that the pain isn't real. I always reinforce the pain you're having is real. You feel physical pain. That is true. It's just the source of it, the area it's stored in, and how you get to it and help to heal it. It's not like healing a wound on your flesh or a broken bone or something like that. It comes from healing that part of your brain that's experienced trauma.
You know the movie The Matrix?
Mm-hmm.
My regular viewers are cringing already because it didn't take me too long to get to that. But you know that scene where it's when I mentioned, everyone knows what I'm going to say, but the scene where Neo has been pulled out of the Matrix for the first time, his body dropped into the river. They pulled his near lifeless body out, and they're starting to heal him up with acupuncture and these therapies. And he opens his eyes eventually, and he says, "Why do my eyes hurt?" And Morpheus answers, "Because you've never used them before. This adult man, and he's never used them before because he used only his like digital eyes in the Matrix, but he's never actually escaped the Matrix until now. So physically, his eyes open up for the very first time in his life." But I love that concept of like you've never used your eyes before, and in a similar sense, broadening it out, you've never seen yourself before. And it's amazing to me how some of this stuff, as you weave through it, you realize you've lived under such spiritual oppression and spiritual trauma and brainwashing and all that stuff that's manifested itself physically and psychologically and all that, to the point that when you finally see it, you, number one, realize, like, I don't know myself. Number two, you might realize there's some parts of me that I don't like because I've apparently responded in ways, I've responded in ways that make sense, but I've become someone I don't want to be because I'm trying to just stay alive in this fight or flight, fawn stuff. And also it almost makes me shudder sometimes to think that relationships sometimes break down, romantic relationships or marriage relationships, because we enter them and we often go through them not knowing who we were. And it's like when you finally step back from it, you're like, I didn't know myself this whole time. And I honestly perhaps wasn't ready for a relationship. Maybe we cry out for a relationship because we want to be loved and accepted so badly. But in reality, we weren't really ourselves ready to go into it because we didn't know ourselves yet. We weren't even started on that process. And then we realize and go through therapy with someone like you and get the work to open these doors, and the floodgates happen. And it's like, who the hell am I? Apart from God, apart from Christ, but also apart from all this trauma, just where is my home base of me, myself? And I almost feel like I know we may have touched on this in the interview before I forget, but I often ask the question, do you miss the idea of heaven? Do you wish you could have gone to heaven? Some people say, no, it sounded boring. It could be just singing worship songs all day. I didn't want to go. Other people did. I was one of them. But I miss the idea of a reset, to say, you know what, you lived your life being born again, and now you're born again, and you've hit the reset button, but now you're 50 years old or you're 60 years old. And it's like, you're getting to know yourself. You almost feel like you want to go back and do the reparenting, but you actually want to start over as a healthy person, and you can't. And there's no afterlife to go to round two, but you're just trying to catch up and do the best you can and say, whatever time I've got left, I need to make that count. And it's not going to count unless I heal what happened in the first place. What is your experience with that in terms of thinking through just getting to know yourself in terms of how you deal with yourself privately, but also in terms of your relationships with other people, and especially in romantic relationships? Because a lot of us, I think, don't realize just how we're so wounded, and we don't want to say that because we want to be strong, we want to be ready for the world, ready for the next relationship. But in many ways, we're that child cowering in the corner because daddy's got the belt out and he's going to hit us again, or we're the child that's crying in bed in the thunderstorm, thinking this reminds us of the hell that's to come, where I will be alone, and when I cry out, no one will come for me because I'll be in hell. We have to admit it. We're a lot weaker and we're a lot more alone than we ever wish we could be. How do you think through that, and how do you start to move past some of the pain of that and be ready, just to be the fullest version of you, and also the fullest version of yourself for your marriage and so forth?
Well, I think that there's two parts to that. I think what you're talking about with the pain of the first experience of not knowing yourself, there's a lot of grief work that has to happen. And it is part of reparenting yourself. But I think that, as you mentioned, is maybe even getting to know yourself and moving into that next phase. But I do think that acknowledging the loss and feeling the grief around it, and there may be a lot of anger there, and there may be a lot of sadness, and the classic, there's some bargaining, but I've noticed too, depending on how long people were in it and the degree to which they were in it, the degree to which they had given their lives to the faith, really affects the intensity of that grieving process. So somebody who's deconverting at 60 is going to have many more years to kind of grieve than somebody who's deconverting at 25. And somebody who went into full-time ministry and is deconverting at 40 after 20 years dedicating their life to ministry is going to have a different type of grief, maybe even complicated grief, related to how they sort of spread this message and processing through that than somebody who was more had built a life for themselves, or they had a non-religious oriented profession and maybe even cultivated relationships outside of their religion. Like, that's going to look different, that grief process, than the person who dedicated their life to it through their occupation. Similarly, as you're moving forward, then that past experience is going to look different for everybody too, because like you said, for some people, their marriages survive. They deconvert together, or maybe they don't deconvert together, but they find that they've connected around things besides religion, and they have a really loving, engaged relationship apart from maybe their particular beliefs about the church or about God or about spirituality, but they're able to respect each other enough to still move forward despite those differences. Marriages that survive in those situations, I've noticed, tend to be the ones where the religion itself was maybe not as dogmatic, not as high control, because a lot of the really high control religions say you can't even be married to somebody who's an unbeliever. So, the healing process looks very different for every person, but I think it does start with an acknowledgement of what you've been through, like the degree to which you've been impacted. And then I think I think people want to jump to the finish line really quick and just be done with all this stuff because it's already taken so much of their lives. But it is I'm not saying this to bring anybody down, but it can be a years-long process to heal, recover, and reorient yourself to a life that feels fully aligned to you. But I think the starting point is curiosity. I think that's the foundation of everything. That's the first thing that goes in a high control religion. That's the first thing that's taken away. That's the first thing you're not allowed to have. We got to shut down critical thinking. So it's starting to explore in whatever way your nervous system can tolerate. I'm coming back to the nervous system again. That doesn't like bring up too much fear, anxiety. So noticing how your body's responding when you're trying out some of these things, but maybe watching those shows that were forbidden growing up. I mean, I'm still doing that. My husband and I just started watching The Sopranos. So if that tells you anything, that was absolutely would not have been allowed. But that is a part of my reclaiming. That's a part of me. Oh, I'm learning. I'm kind of exploring something new. Watching Friends or Sex in the City or, any
Simpsons.
Simpsons. Yeah. Any shows like that. So, I mean, I'm giving a pretty basic example here with media, but media was so controlled in my environment, music, all that kind of stuff, that just exposing myself gradually and noticing how I'm tolerating it, that was really the foundation, the beginning for me. And it's not trying to do everything all at once either.
Yeah. Yeah. And giving yourself that freedom and grace to, it's amazing. You can be more gracious after deconverting from Christianity than the grace-filled version of it in Christianity. On a similar note, we've talked, I think, a lot about the ways we suppress ourselves. I was curious if you could connect a few dots for us about the ways that this emotional suppression, but also maybe weave in even psychological and spirit or sexual repression. A lot of us end up really feeling like there's a whole part of us that we have to kind of hide, whether it's the anger you talked about earlier, or for me, certainly purity culture. If you looked at something even purely accidentally, it was totally not something you were trying to sin, but you looked at something and you saw something. I remember even in church, I've mentioned this before, but there you'd see a woman where she's just sitting in church in the pew in front of you, and her blouse like slides off, and you see her big bra strap there. As a kid, as a young boy, that could literally cause my heart to race the entire rest of the service and feel guilty for the entire day, just because I saw her bra strap, the top of it. Or, anything like that, where you're thinking something. And when you add all this suppression and repression together, you kind of end up in a spot where you've split your personality into the public world, public meaning both but what people see you as, but also the way you try to present yourself, and also the private world where you're like, this is my inner closet. I hope nobody ever guesses that this is here. And, that's very, very prevalent in these stories we hear of these pastors where they're preaching and they're writing books and they're traveling the world and they're turning the world upside down, and they've got these churches of 20,000 people. Then you find out that they're screwing their secretary for the last 10 years. It's like, well, you clearly had a private life here. But, the suppression that occurs in people who are not, ignoring the con artists, the pastors, but just average people who are trying to go to church. They're trying to look good, but they also know that they do some bad things. And their theology says, yeah, you're a bad person, so acknowledge it. It's a good thing to repent, admit your sin. But at the same time, we're creatures that are constantly looking for approval. And part of the approval process is to look good. And it's just part of our nature to say, I want to confess my sins and admit it, but I also don't want to confess because I don't want you guys to look down on me. But when you look at that, we end up being sort of split personalities, not in the technical and mental health issue, but just we've got two different parts of us that the world sees and that we try to even show to ourselves. I think if for a lot of us who get kind of more serious about Christianity, we take it very seriously to have that public face dominate even our private face, where it's like, no, you have to be the same person. That's what integrity is. You can't be saying purity culture in public, but I'm going to go look at dirty pictures in private. It has to be everything. And sort of that Christ's heart, my home motif of like all the closets, all of them belong to Jesus, all of them. But when you live in that suppression for so long, it does affect your nervous system. And just how does that impact work as far as you understand, both in your life and others you've talked to? And how do we begin to be kind to our nervous systems as we sort of unpack that?
Well, you're already talking in parts terminology there, which is the internal family system. So you're like, part of you is this way,
Maybe
and
I
part
need
of
to
you
go
is
get a
that
degree
way.
in this stuff.
I love parts work. So I think that okay, so we'll start with how it happens, which is what you were describing there, and these expectations of perfectionism and purity and always striving to be Christ-like, but that sort of undermines perhaps our natural inclinations or desires. So you were giving some examples about sexuality. I mean, that's a really significant one because there are such clear parameters around what sexuality is to look like in the church. And it's usually heterosexual, male led, so very patriarchal in nature, monogamous, marriage, all of that. I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody. They all know. We've all been conditioned. But that is just a portion of the population fits into those categories and appreciates that and feels like that's aligned for them if they weren't conditioned to believe that's how it had to be. And there's so many sexual interests and preferences and relationship structures that are apart from that very specific narrow view of it. And so if you are not somebody who actually fit into that one compartment that was outlined, and there's people outside the church that is what works for them and that's their preferences, and that's great. But if you were part of the group that you maybe have a kink that you're interested in or a desire that's not considered maybe even super acceptable by mainstream in our puritanical culture that's widespread throughout here in the US anyway, there's going to be a lot of shame and suppression around that. And so when you're trying to disconnect that or shut that down, the way the church frames it is typically like that's sin, that's sinful desire. So men I know are often taught to bounce their eyes and you can't think about that, or you're cognitively bouncing your thoughts, or you're shutting off those thoughts. And because you're not allowing yourself to be curious, again, we're coming back to curiosity, it's just being shut down in a way that you now aren't even maybe noticing your body's desires or how your body is responding to specific types of interest or what feels good or doesn't feel good in a sexual relationship or otherwise. Those signals are just not connecting anymore because certain signals have become dangerous in a way. And so now they're shut down.
Yeah, it's true. It's amazing to me too how I think looking back at Bible college days, people have no idea the damage that some of this stuff does, and endless Bible studies where every men's group Bible study goes, it's the same thing. You read Jeremiah this, read James that, read Philippians this. Okay, well, now that we've read that, let's get practical stuff. Who's here struggling with masturbation this week? It's like, didn't we do this last week? Yeah, it's the same problem. For years, it's the same thing. Men's groups, they go to that question all the time. And I was just thinking to myself, you're looking at the next generation of pastors right here. These 30, 40, 50 men I'm with, these men are going to flood the pastorate and the churches here, and then the next class after us. If you who are about to vote on these men, are these going to be our pastors, in a year or two? If you who are going to vote in the churches knew what was happening in these behind the scenes discussions in a conservative fundamentalist Bible college, like Lancaster Bible College, where I went, you would be horrified and think, I don't know that I want almost any of these men to lead us. Not because they're bad men, but because you'd be horrified at the truth that's actually in their heads. And it's amazing what this suppression can do, both in terms of creating two personalities, the public persona and the real person, but also the self-hatred. Regardless of how people approach the two personality things, it's like you have created a generation of people who, if they were honest, would say, I hate myself. Like one of the most memorable things I've ever gone through, it was one day, I'll never forget it. When I was at LBC at Lancaster Bible College, there was this great man named Mr. Foster. I found he literally just died like a week ago. I was very sad to hear, but this short little man, bald man with these little spectacles. He just looked like this, like little grandfather, like a Santa Claus kind of character. Just as sweet as could be. Sweet as could be, huge belly, but so much love in his heart. You just think, this man, you just want to give him a hug. And you want a hug from him. He's so nice. Just kindness drips from him. And I signed up for one of his classes to take piano lessons. And it was one of those things where there could have been 10 or 15 kids in the class, students in the class, but it ended up for that particular time slot, it was just me. And I assumed that he would cancel it because it was not like a bigger class. He said, no, I'll meet with just you. And so we met every week for piano lessons. It was great. But I remember this one time we were about to start, and he just said, Tim, close your book. And he said, how are you doing? And we talked for a few minutes, and it got real quiet several times. Just he could tell I was really struggling with some stuff. And he said, I want to ask you a question. You feel completely worthless, don't you? And I mean to tell you, he wasn't a therapist, but I mean, he made my eyes, the floodgates open. I was just dripping in tears. It was one of the most just momentous things I've ever been through. But it showed me. It was like, that's the real you. You can proclaim all day, I've got worth because I'm a child of the King, and I'm going to heaven. You're covered by the blood. You're worth. And no, that's your belief system. What's your worldview? What do you really believe? Oh, I believe I'm completely worthless. And these guys, you'd see these guys and struggling with their suppression and thinking, you guys hate yourself. And you think you're going to get this magic bullet because you're finally going to probably find a woman to marry in Bible college, and you're going to now have free sex. You can have sex every day. And now your porn problem and your masturbation problem is suddenly gone because now it's acceptable. And it's even encouraged because you have to have a lot of kids to, have a quiver full. But in reality, you're dodging a bullet, but you're not. You're carrying into your marriage where you might even be sexually happy or not, but you're going to end up saying to yourself in the deepest part of yourself, I hate myself. And if my wife knew who I really was, she'd be horrified. And so again, you're like, don't tell anybody what's really going on in your head and your heart. And that I break, and I wish Christians could see what you're doing. Like, what the hell are you doing? It's insane.
Yeah, and we have the different perspectives of gender here too, because I've never obviously been a fly on the wall in any of those men's groups. I hear the stories that are so similar to yours. And I think for women, so men are expected to be the sexual animals that need to be controlled, right? And women have to cover up and be super modest to not be a stumbling block. So that's how that interacts. But then the message that we receive is really nothing about sexuality, because we're not expected to even have sexual desire, really. Maybe we'll have it for our husband after marriage, but things like, I don't think masturbation ever came up in any of the youth group stuff I was a part of, or the young women's stuff that I was a part of. Certainly not in any conversations with my female friends. And I think that introduces another type of shame for women who, there are women who are very sexual, and were very sexual during that time, starting in tween years and puberty and adolescence, and felt so confused because it just wasn't even talked about. So like they went through those developmental stages like, something's wrong with me that I'm interested or curious or masturbating or anything like that. So it's sort of the opposite of like, the shame is still there, but it's because of the absence of acknowledgement that women can even have sexual interests. And so there's certainly no encouragement about exploring your sexual identity, pleasure, preferences, any of that stuff.
When you look at that, the question of the nervous system part of it, what are some of the things that have helped you and then other people that you've come across that helps us just get in touch with and start to heal our nervous system? Just because it seems like that's a big part of this. I know you talked about the inflammation, and the gut is a big part of this, but I'm not obviously a medical doctor in any way, shape, or form, so I don't want to act like I understand how it all connects and works. But I do know that the nervous system is often on high alert. What are some of the things that are helping you to heal that and to get to a point where you just can even just recognize what's going on and see it for what it is.
One thing that I try to educate a lot of my clients about, and I actually was just talking about this in my membership community. We did one of our live learning sessions this last Friday, is the window of tolerance. And this is becoming more widely talked about too, as people, the nervous system talk is coming more and more online. But the window of tolerance is this idea that so you have this kind of range in the middle, and this is the window of tolerance right here. So when you're in the window of tolerance, you're still connected to yourself. You're sort of still in control. You're feeling a range of emotions. So you may have anger, frustration, sadness, happiness, like all the different types of emotions. And then they just kind of flow in here. But your nervous system hasn't really taken over. It hasn't hijacked anything. Your prefrontal cortex is still online. You're still thinking clearly. You're still moving through the world and making decisions that are safe and aligned with what's good for you. Now, when you get outside the window of tolerance into hyperarousal, we're looking up here. So that's the up is the hyperarousal. So hyperarousal is connected with fight or flee trauma responses. So you have your fight, flight, and freeze, and then fawn is sort of this fourth add-on over here that we can talk about. But fight and flee is when your nervous system is now getting charged up, your heart rate is elevating, maybe you're breathing more rapidly, you're taking in more oxygen, so you're getting ready to either fight or flee. And when your nervous system is in that state, your prefrontal cortex is gone offline now. You have another part of your brain running the show. And so being aware, I think, of that shift in your nervous system is one of the most important things for people starting to recover. And I'll get back to recovery in just a second. I want to talk about hypoarousal really quick. So you have the window here, right? So this is calm, connected, all of that. You're still feeling emotions, but then you dip down here, perhaps, and that's hypoarousal. And that's when your brain doesn't believe that you can fight and win successfully or get away successfully. So now you're frozen and you're sort of hoping the danger passes, but you can't really do anything about it. You're in sort of a collapsed state. And this activates a different part of the nervous system. And I'm not good with the different there's the parasympathetic and all of these different things. And so people who are interested can read about that. I can't remember all the names of them. But when you're in hypoarousal, you're in this collapse state, but everything's slowing down now. So your digestion slows down, your heart rate slows down, your breathing slows down, your blood is being pulled towards your core organs, not your extremities. So you might feel tingly or cold in your hands or your feet. And that is to sort of try to preserve life in the event that I can't get away from the attack that's going to happen. And so I also talk about this ladder, the nervous system ladder, the autonomic ladder. And so at the top, if we look at it as a ladder instead of like this up and down window, the top, it's sort of safe, connected. We're experiencing emotion, but we're fine. Essentially, we're still thinking clearly. We're not super frightened. In the middle is where we have the hyperarousal. So now we're descending down the ladder. Now we're getting amped up. We're getting ready to do the thing to keep us safe. And then at the bottom is the hypoarousal or the collapse or freeze. So when people are really disconnected from their body or there's a lot of suppression, this happens a lot in high control religions because you can't fight it and you can't flee from it. You're just sort of stuck there with the fear around you all the time. A lot of people do find themselves at the bottom of the ladder. That's where this disconnect from your body really comes from, and you're not getting those signals anymore. So the goal to healing the nervous system is working your way up the ladder. And that starts, like, if people are really at the bottom where they're in class or super disconnected, it's starting to actually do things like body scans where you're sort of scanning through and you're noticing your body during different times of the day, in different situations, in different settings. It's pausing to sort of slow down, see what's there, and just like give it mindful awareness. You're just getting curious about your body. And then when you eventually, even that noticing can actually kick people up into hyper arousal because they're like, wait, my body's not a safe place. So, but when you get into hyper arousal states, so you're moving your way up now, that's where you can start practicing some of the grounding techniques or sort of the calming techniques. So you'll hear about breathing, guided visualizations, progressive muscle relaxation. So these activities where, okay, now I'm noticing, oh, my heart is really beating fast, or I'm breathing rapidly, or I just feel amped up. Now we can do things to try to calm the nervous system. So when you're at the bottom, you're just trying to notice it and bring activation. And then when it's activated, now you're trying to remind it, okay, you're actually safe. That was a very long answer.
The good one, those are great topics. Would you put humming in as one of the grounding techniques?
So that would be, so humming stabilizes the nervous system or brings it. I would say that would probably be if you're in hyper arousal. Okay. You can kind of you're moving the energy through and allowing the nervous system to stabilize that way. It could also be, so there's different types of intonations almost that you can use. And I don't know a lot about this specific topic, but I think that there are some that help you actually get to the hypo-aroused state too when you're at the bottom of the ladder. So it could be activating, it could be regulating.
Gotcha.
Probably depends on which one you're using and in what context.
I found it to be really helpful. Just I know people talk about, healing the vagus nerve and so forth, but that's been one of the things I've been doing a lot, just at night when the intensity of putting 4 small children to bed is finally done and the day's over, and I just kind of get in bed. I kind of get the lights down low and then just do some humming, and it actually, I was surprised at how much it helps. Have you ever heard of the app where you I forget what it's called, but you see bright lights? Have you seen that? Mm-hmm. There's an app, I've used it at times. I'll look it up and I'll put the link beneath the video if anyone wants to check it out. They say it's the closest you can get to having a trip without any medicine to get there. But you know how there's a flashlight on the back of your cell phone. And so when you use this app, you actually flip your phone backward. You don't look at the phone, you look at the back of it. And you close your eyes and you look at the light. And what happens is it starts flashing in different ways with your eyes closed, but you see it a little bit through your eyelids. And it's amazing, but you begin to eventually feel like you're floating through a tunnel. And it's really quite fascinating. It's like it really has calmed me down. I mean, even my kids have enjoyed it. But it's a fascinating thing. But it's I love this topic in general because, number one, I don't know much about it, obviously, but also it gets you to the point of realizing that, again, you haven't been yourself. Just like we would say, you haven't been yourself because of the theology. You haven't been yourself because you haven't been embodied yet. Like you don't know who you are. You don't know have any way. And it just, I don't know about you, but for me, the idea of loving yourself, that well was so poisoned when I was in Christianity. Like self-love is the enemy. And I know it can get syrupy and very, squishy and all that. It can get to a point where you're just kind of trying to create an atmosphere that almost feels fake and feels too weird. And I get that. That's just part of, I think, my Christian background. But I've learned that there really is a piece of this that like we don't get it. Like self-love really is a big path to this. And that's not just self-love in terms of, do I like my identity? Like, do you love your body? And do you even know it? And to be able to get to the point where you're gracious and patient and really kind to yourself and loving yourself, it really does make a difference. It makes such a difference. And I feel like I've had to go through that because like I'm going through a divorce, and it's probably normal when you go through a divorce to, feel like, what did I do to deserve this? And why aren't good things happening to me? But you end up sort of just feeling like you're down on yourself a lot and your life is hard. And the reality is that whether you're going through a divorce or not, there's a million little things in life that kind of say, yeah, you kind of deserve the bad things. And yeah, this is just, you're not that good of a person. And a lot of it is connected to theology, but you end up having to get to a point, if you're going to be healing, in my opinion, where you say, I have truly been attacking myself. You use the phrase policing yourself. But I would add, I'm policing myself. I'm also attacking myself, even unwittingly. And it's got to stop. Like, you got to become your own friend at some point. You got to say, I am not safe in my own skin. And it's yeah, it started as their fault perhaps because of the messaging they sent, but eventually you become an adult, you're responsible for your own thoughts and your own reactions. I am responsible to start being kind to myself and to be safe in my own skin. And that's a journey sometimes, just to see that that's not happening yet, and to figure out how to start it. But it's amazing when once you start that process, in my opinion, like once if you really do it well and you're really digging stuff up in a healthy way, you begin to truly say, I'm gonna take care of myself from this point on. We're so used to, you mentioned before, serving other people. I'm so used to, like, I bend over backwards for my kids, and everything is theirs, their needs, their needs, their needs. And that's so critical. But it's like you have to also say to yourself, there's a child inside of me that needs a little bit of pampering. And it's a hard journey. It's a hard thing to think through. And I would say I'm probably more at the beginning of that journey than anywhere in the middle. But I do appreciate people like you who can kind of tell us, like, some of the directions that we need to go to get that process started.
Well, and I think I know exactly what you mean with the self-love as a phrase, even being triggering and activating for some, perhaps. I was the same way. But my hack for that, around that, is to try to embrace self-compassion. So if self-love feels like too much, because even sometimes certain words can be really triggering, or phrases, self-compassion can sometimes feel more accessible for people, but it's the same concept. It's learning to be kind to yourself, learning that you're going to make mistakes, and that's just part of being a human. It's also being able to nurture yourself, and the joy framework that we were raised with, Jesus others you, right? Like that we have to actually reverse that. We may not even include Jesus anymore, actually, but it really does need to be you first, and tending to your needs, tending to that inner child. So yeah, for people who find it tough to even like the pop psychology of self-love, it just might feel a bit more like toxic positivity. So try self-compassion and see how that works for you.
When you said the JOI thing, I thought we should do an episode sometime on just all the little triggers. We'd have to have a big warning to people. But I was thinking immediately of, like, number one, the whole Bill Gothard, the umbrellas thing.
Yeah.
And then secondarily, I was thinking of the word. Did you do the wordless book?
Oh yeah.
And the little bracelets.
Colors.
Oh, so many things. And my kids just finished up their Awana for this year, and I was like, oh,
I know.
I'm cringing inside. But anyway, I was curious about physical pleasure. We talked a little bit about sexuality, but just physical pleasure in general. It can include, of course, sensuality and or eroticism, but just how do people who've been through all this learn to truly be kind and self-compassionate in the sense of resting? And resting was such a big deal as Christians. You need to work hard to enter the promised land. You work hard and you have faith, and then you'll get your rest. But the reality is that we are people that haven't truly learned to rest. We were constantly trying to be sanctified and be holy. And there's this whole hamster wheel of be more holy and be more sensitive to uncover your secret sins. And when you finally get to a point where your self-compassion is about resting, and maybe including in that just physical exercise and even breathing, even what you eat, what are some of the things that have changed for you in being self-compassionate, that have helped you to just rest and to get off the rat race, not of life, but the rat race of trying to feel safe in your own skin and to feel like you're acceptable, and just to in the words of the Beatles, just let it be. What would you say to that?
Yeah. So this is one I think that's extra tough because it's woven into culture here in the US so much as well. I'm reading a really good book right now called Do Nothing. And she talks a lot about the intersection of the Protestant work ethic and how we're just a chronically overwhelmed, exhausted, and burned out society. But even people who weren't raised religious still have this indoctrination of this Protestant work ethic of like, idle hands are the devil's playground, and to get ahead, you have to work really hard. And, if you're resting or idle is a big one, that you're lazy or slothful, or it's a negative thing. And so I think I've had to learn to rest. And this has been a recent thing for me because even after leaving Christianity, I didn't give up that high functioning religious trauma I had. That was very much connected to keep going, keep moving, be productive, achieve, achieve, achieve. And so it's actually been having to conscientiously build in either days or blocks of time in the week to watch a show I like or work on like sewing or crocheting like I talked about doing, or being outside in nature without it being motivated by exercise. Like going for a bike ride, but not going as fast as you can because you're trying to use it as your fitness for the day. Like enjoying the warmth of the sun and the flowers and the nature that you're passing, the scenery. So I think incorporating mindfulness into your week is a huge part of it. Of like, we're not just trying to check things off a to-do list here, actually just sitting, resting, taking a nap, reading a novel, doing an art project, getting coffee with a friend. Like those don't fall under the umbrella of productivity, but those are so important for your well-being.
I love it. It's interesting. This is a bit of a silly example, but my kids play Minecraft a lot. Mm-hmm. And for anyone that doesn't know it, it's a glorified way of playing with blocks. It's a lot more to it than that, but
digital blocks.
And there's a part of me that when I first saw it, I mean, I don't have time. I barely have time to shower and shave every day. So the idea of playing any game of any kind is not really on my radar right now. But as I watched my kids play it a little bit, I thought, in some ways, this is pure rest for them. Like they're just going into these digital caves on the computer and saying, "Oh, there's a diamond there, and I can smash it, and collect it." And it's just fun. It's just fun. Or they can use those gems and those stones to create a house, and it's just pure fun. And it's really interesting to see it. But I literally I almost thought to myself, should I try to play Minecraft sometime? And the workaholic in me and the perfectionist said, you know what? I could create a Minecraft YouTube channel. I could do it, but try to monetize it to make money. Like, no, just freaking rest. Just like just break a few blocks and enjoy the process. But it's interesting, and I feel like that's one of the hardest parts of this is just learning to rest. And I feel like so many of us get on that cycle where we feel like we're just trying so hard. And I think it's when you weave in the idea that there's other parts of life that aren't going well, where you have to work extra hard to make money, or work extra hard to just get everyone where they need to go for their schedules, your life can just feel nonstop. And I feel like in some ways, you really do have to figure out a way. I mean, it's going to look different for everybody. You have to figure out a way to find that pause button and say, my life cannot be nonstop everything. Like I have to find a way to slow it down. I'm not saying I do it well at all. And there are seasons, obviously, but I feel like that's one of the biggest things. And I know that for me, I worry, about it's easy when you're younger to think my body can do this. When we're younger, I can pull the all-nighter. And now, my age, pulling all-nighter is not an option. But you got to realize, like, if you do this stuff, it's you've created, like, we're dealing with seeds that were happening in our childhood that we're now reaping the issues. But if you don't deal with these issues physically now, they will create much greater issues later. And it's like this stuff, you deal with it now in a perhaps expensive way with a therapist, or you deal with it in a much more expensive way because you're in the hospital. And I know I'm preaching to the choir there, but it breaks my heart that sometimes life feels like we can't do it, but it's like you gotta try.
Well, and you do bring up a really good point, is that some people do not have the ability to disconnect because they're in survival mode of trying to actually survive, make enough money to survive, like just meet basic needs. And it is a very exhausting space to be in. And so in spaces like that, it might not be carving out an hour to go for a bike ride, like I had said before, but you talked about showering and shaving. And so when you're showering and shaving, if you're introducing mindfulness into that process of just noticing the water on your skin, noticing the bubbles as they're sudsing up, and noticing the scrape of the razor against your face, like just being very present to the sensations that are happening, during those activities that you're already doing, instead of thinking, okay, I need to do this and this and this, and I'm going to go here, and what happened with that conversation yesterday, and do I need to follow up on that? Like, that's keeping your mind super busy and super exhausted. But when you come into the moment of the activity that you're doing, even if it's a thing you have to do, it creates a little mental rest for yourself, even in that experience. Or like for me, if I'm going to drink my cup of coffee every morning, I can drink that cup of coffee while reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video, or I can just hold the warm mug of coffee, notice how the warmth feels on my hands, smell it as I'm raising it up, incorporate that sensation, noticing how it feels on my tongue, going down my throat, the taste of it. So now I'm incorporating all these senses, and that's restful. And that's 10 or 15 minutes of something I'd be doing either way, and I've just chosen not to maybe read or listen to a podcast during that time.
I love it. Good stuff. I was curious. I'm going to sort of paint this picture. I know my questions sometimes are a little bit longer than they need to be. But I think this is a good one that needs a little bit of explanation. Do you ever have the experience where you're talking to somebody and you just have this hint in your head and you begin to explore a little bit where they're truly seeing the world in a way that you wouldn't have guessed, and you almost want to be like, no, that can't be what they're thinking. But you keep on hearing hints like, oh, that it does sound like you're thinking of it that way. For example, one of the ways for me, I sometimes talk to people who are deconverted, who have left Christianity, and I've realized that they still see lust as a problem. I'm thinking to myself, like, so wait, you see lust as a problem still? Lust is not acceptable. And like, I thought we kind of dealt with that in deconstruction. They're like, no, they deconstructed Christianity as a worldview. They never deconstructed lust. That's still like a red flag for them in their heart. And I feel like there's probably this whole big box of myths that Christians have, and high control religions in general, are going to perpetuate about you and your body, and how these myths are really going to basically interfere with your recovery, because not because they themselves are purely toxic, though they are, but because you can't see them, because you have framed them still in the box of like, this is what it looks like to be healthy. To be healthy, I should not be entertaining lustful thoughts, fantasies, or whatever other 100 other things we could look into. Like this is what healthiness looks like. Or someone that perhaps is like, if I ever look at pornography, that's so unhealthy, and they're locked into these things, and these myths perpetuate. And then when it comes time to heal, they can't see that they've got all these myths that are still dominating their interpretive ability for their lives and themselves. Like, what are some of the biggest myths that you see that people are just like blind to, or like you don't realize? You think that's the healthy path, and it's actually it's either the flip reverse of that, or it's at least questionable.
So you're saying myths, and I think of it in terms of internalized beliefs. And I think that you're talking about deconstruction, which you're deconstructing maybe doctrine and things like that. And I think of healing in terms of deconversion, where you're getting at the elements of mind control and those internalized beliefs. So I just wanted to introduce some of that language too, because I think deconstruction is probably much better known of a term than deconversion. But I think those of us who are indoctrinated into a high control system really have to go through this deconversion process, not just understanding, okay, it's all mythology or the doctrines are just flawed and controlling. It goes much deeper than that into how is your mind and your body affected by these teachings. So I think that's really what you're talking about. And the other part of this that can be very difficult is a lot of it's woven in again to our culture here in the US. Just with the roots of, the Puritans and things like that. It's some of it, like you said about lust, like you can grow up not religious and still have a very narrow view around sexuality just because of our culture sort of shaming things and stigmatizing things. So yeah, I think a lot of things around sexuality, it's beyond deconstruction. It's like you really have to get in there and kind of see, like, what are your internalized beliefs around relationship structures. When I say relationship structures, I'm talking about monogamy and that kind of thing. Like, that is very much the norm in our US society, is that is the right structure for a relationship is monogamy. And that's not going to be the right structure for all people. We're looking at sexual orientation. We're looking at gender identity. We're looking at, when I say sexual preferences or desires, I'm talking more about kinks and things that are maybe more arousing to some people than others. And so, like, even talking about those kinds of things, like in sex therapy, there's a term like, don't yuck on someone else's yum. But there's a very vanilla oriented attitude towards sexuality in our US culture too. And so, yeah, part of it's religion deconstruction, part of it, and a big part of it's deconversion, but a lot of it also is just looking at cultural messaging, how relationships are structured, even within the structure itself of male-female roles. Like, who does what? Who does the caretaking? Who does the errands? Who does the childcare? Who does the breadwinning? All of that kind of stuff that's a gender normative thing in our culture too. That's not just Christianity. So that needs to be looked at. And that's one that a lot of people struggle with. And I'm trying to think what other, I know, around parents. This comes up all the time with, people on my social media, clients, things like that, is this deeply ingrained belief of honor thy father and mother. And again, that is a cultural one, but like really interrogating that. Like, if you have a parent who has been contributed to your trauma actively and still triggers and activates you, are they somebody that you should be actively cultivating a close relationship with? I don't ever promote like, oh, let's go straight to cutoff and straight to estrangement, but like, what are the emotional boundaries or maybe some disconnect that may need to happen here, at least while you're working on healing and kind of figuring out what your values are? Do they inhibit your ability to heal and to practice things that feel more aligned with who you are? So a lot around parents, like that's a huge one that comes up.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. It feels like in some ways too, it helps so much to me when you deconvert to realize that the past generation was lied to substantially. And so in many ways, we're trying to reframe our relationship with them, but also to just reframe how we see them. You know, when you grow up in an environment where everybody and their mother spanks the kids, everybody does it. And, you know, I remember even watching a Andy Griffith show. I mean, just TV, everyone watches it, public TV. Andy Griffith talks about he's going to get his belt out and give Opie a good whooping out back with his belt. You know, it's just like everybody does that. You talk about it on TV. And you know, everybody's going to church. Everybody is honoring the Sabbath by not working hard on Sundays, and all these things. They're all listening to James Dobson. They're all reading his books. And you're like, when you grow up and that's what's just hitting you at every direction, it gives you that freedom to kind of forgive them a little bit and say, you know what, if I had gone through all that and I didn't know much about why the Bible's not accurate and so forth, why it's mythology, I could have been suckered in just the same. I mean, I didn't get out till I was 43 years old. So it kind of gives you that freedom to forgive them a little bit. Even, I mean, not to overlook abuses, of course, but to just say, you know, there's more to this story than just you were an idiot or you were toxic. Like, there's more to this. And it helps me a lot to think through what they've been through.
Well, I think generational trauma is a huge part of it. And there's religion tends to be woven through the generational trauma. And so I think it's learning to hold both pieces of that. So learning to have compassion for that younger self that was hurt by that parent or those parenting practices. And then as the adult self, who you're kind of in your thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, like knowing, yeah, okay, they were also indoctrinated. They also have their own traumas. that doesn't bypass the pain that that younger self experienced, and that younger self still needs that nurturing and maybe protection. If your parent is able to respect your boundaries and not try to reconvert you, or not try to bring God in every conversation, or not be nasty to you about your choices, like if they're able to do that, then I mean, there is probably space for compassion and maintaining that connection, that relationship. However, if they're judging you and trying to reconvert you and doing things that are really activating that younger child part of you, you have a responsibility to your child self to keep that self safe now, and not to put it in settings where it's going to be re-traumatized and hurt.
Preaching to the choir there. Well, I was thinking about how sometimes in church and youth group and all that, you would hear messages about suffering for Christ. Maybe, someone prays about it and pray for those going through medical concerns or going through hard times in their life in some way. Please help them to learn to suffer just like Christ suffered. And it feels like in some ways they were trying to get our tolerance for lack of boundaries, tolerance for chronic pain, even for emotional neglect, for lack of self-care. They were trying to take your tolerance up so that you would just put up with more and more and more. And I think we could argue that it's definitely a form of gaslighting. Like, it's not that bad, and you need to do this. This is part of how you become holy. God, this is iron sharpening iron. God is putting you like gold. He's smelting you, and he's the refiner's fire. And this fire, when it's done, is going to make you shine, and you're going to be glorious. But you end up with this outcome where they're basically saying, put up with a whole bunch of horse shit in relationships and the way you even take care of yourself. Treat yourself like garbage. Let other people walk all over you, and hold your head up high because you're doing just exactly what Christ did on the way to Golgotha. And it's like, when you escape this, you realize that the suffering motif as a way to glory and as the best path for your life. And especially if you can suffer with a smile on your face. I mean, a true smile on your face. Like, oh, you hit me on one cheek. All right, I'll give you the other cheek. You take my cloak. All right, I'll give you my shoes too. You want me to walk 1 mile? I'll walk 2. I will just bend over backwards and be your carpet. And you get that message so much in especially in the New Testament. Do you feel like some people are still trapped in that? Like, I guess this is how I become a good person. I suffer.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that chronic suffering, too, is a part of what we were also talking about earlier with some of the chronic health conditions that crop up when you're just like, allow almost the suffering to continue in your life. I think that deconstructing or healing from that internalized belief about what it means to be a good person is a huge part of this, that actually you don't have to put up with being treated like garbage to be a good person. And it's okay to advocate for your needs and to set boundaries and all of that. But it feels really scary, I think, for people to do that. And that's where some of the attachment wounding comes in, of like, you feel like this is the way to maintain stability in relationships. That's not really how it's talked about in the religious side of things, but that's how it becomes wired into the nervous system. Like, to be acceptable in the prime relationship of your relationship with God or Jesus or whoever, you have to just continually be self-sacrificing and submissive to whatever the rules are. And so when you learn like that's the way that you maintain stability in your relationship with a deity, it's going to be transferred into how you interact in all of your relationships. And so it's healing that original attachment wound too, of I can be safe and secure in relationships while also setting boundaries and advocating for my own needs.
So much work to do. It feels like at times overwhelming, almost like a tsunami,
Oh, I know.
You mentioned before a little bit about gender identity and so forth. Could we talk for just a second about some of the specific pains that the LGBTQ plus community is going through? What are some of the things that are specifically affecting them in terms of being able to really feel like they're getting past some of these traumas? And I mean, I'm sure embodiment is a whole different ballgame in that context. But what are some of the things that you're noticing that both are unique struggles to that community, but also ways that, they can be healthy, and also ways that those of us that wouldn't relate to those struggles, that we can really support them in every which way and let them know that they're not alone.
Yeah. Well, I always give a disclaimer prior to answering any questions like this that I am a heterosexual female. I am cisgender, so I cannot speak from personal experience, nor would I try to necessarily assume that I would know exactly what that would be like for folks who are in that situation. But what I'm noticing a lot that's coming up with people who are leaving these high control religions is realizing that they're not exactly straight. And I say not exactly straight because this is another thing that we do in our culture is we want to label everything. Like we think we need to know what we are if we're not straight. So we're either lesbian or we're bi or we feel like we need to have the category that we fit into. And I think for those of us who want to support people who maybe do not identify as cisgender heterosexual, it's also not trying to expect them to have a label or a category for themselves, to accept that they're being curious and open and exploring, and what's true for them today might not be true for them in a month from now. And that is okay because people don't have to exist in a certain way. And so I think it's having a lot of curiosity ourselves, as well as, and not curiosity like probing into like tell me about yourself and what you believe and where you're at, but just curiosity in terms of it doesn't have to be a very specific rigid way with a whole bunch of labels. But I think in general that community is obviously directly persecuted in many ways. They're being directly persecuted politically right now, and for many years, of course, too. And then there's also been just sort of a disregard as to that category, like in the churches, like that it just doesn't really exist, or that like you can't be a Christian and not be cisgender or heterosexual, right? Like, and if you are other, then it's sin or it's something that you have to get right with, and it's obviously not the case. And so I think that there's a double dose of shame that comes with that because now your identity, preferences, orientation are linked to sin. And that becomes an internalized shame response too, or can become an internalized shame response.
It's interesting. I haven't had too many experiences that fall in the category of what we're talking about, but I did when I first moved to Georgia for this doctor that helped me cure my insomnia. I had to get a car, and I remember, back when you're a Christian, one of the big questions you ask when you meet people, if you think that they're probably a Christian, you say, "Where do you go to church?"
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this guy that was helping me get this car. I was new to Georgia. It's like, "Yeah, where do you go to church?" And he mentioned one of these mega churches, and there's a lot of them here in Atlanta. If you've heard of Charles Stanley, he's this old guy that just passed, but he had this mega church, and his son Andy Stanley had an even bigger mega church. It's like 3 or 4 or 5 campuses or something. But he was like, "Yeah, I go to North Point," but he got real quiet. He's like, "But I don't really feel like I can go there and like be myself." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" Because I'm new to the area and I don't know too much about all the churches. I know I wasn't a mega church person, but he's like, "Well, just hope this doesn't offend you, but I'm gay, and I don't really feel accepted there." Like they're not really judgmental there. They're probably more on the spectrum of being liberal about it. But he's like, I still don't feel like I can just be myself even there. And it was the first time in my life that I really talked like in depth with someone who's gay. He's like right across the table from me. And I mean, he's just a lovely man with a lovely, beautiful heart. And at the time, I was not deconstructed or deconverted at all yet. I hadn't started the process for many years later. But fortunately, I kept my goddamn mouth shut and didn't say what I was thinking, which was, "I feel bad for you, but you need to repent of your sins." But as I look back at it now, of course, everything is different. I would never even, do anything but condemn myself for those thoughts when I did think that. Looking back at him, and I unfortunately didn't stay in touch with him, but I remember many conversations because it unfortunately took a while to buy the car, but many hours of conversation sitting there and thinking, this is just a really nice person. This is a really, really, really nice man. And he is in like a living hell because he can't even go to church. And looking back at it, I feel so bad. And it's like you say, like as a heterosexual man, I can't understand some of the pain that these friends of ours have gone through. But boy, I feel like, especially you mentioned politics, like what's the political stuff now, they need our support more than ever, and for us to be allies. And I feel so burdened, and I feel like I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but it's on my heart a lot. And I know that a lot of people are. I mean, this country is becoming a living hell for a lot of people because of what's been happening. And I sure hope that we can offset the negativity. I hope we can do more than enough to make people feel safe and to know that we care about them. So uh, on that note, can I ask, just whether it's that community or all the other people that we might have in mind, sort of a wrap up question? You can, we can go any direction from here you want to. But one of the big things that comes up for me is the idea of narratives, the internal narrative. I love to write. I've always loved to write. I feel like part of me likes it because I think I'm somewhat good at it, but also part of me at times I get my sort of my breath caught away because I see someone else writing so much better, and I'm like, why couldn't I find the words like that? Like that's amazing. And especially in this context, like you found the words to describe the pain. I'm like, you literally took the words out of my mouth. That's perfect. And I kind of get upset at myself, that perfection. Like, why didn't I think of that? But that's exactly, if I'm being honest with myself, I would have come to that conclusion. And so that poetic side of me is constantly in this cycle of trying to find better words. And it's a love-hate relationship because I love that I'm trying, and I sometimes find some really cool words to describe it. But I struggle to find the right words, and I love when I can. But it's a love-hate relationship because I feel like I'm constantly trying to do it. But the beauty of it is, even though it's a bit of a perfectionism that's coming out there, at times you do find the right words, whether you think of them yourself or someone else, shares something, you relate to it, and you begin in finding the right words to rewrite your internal narrative. And you begin to rewrite your present and your future as well as your past. And you begin to feel like there's a story here. I'm a book with many chapters. And I love that there's chapters yet unwritten, but I'm in one right now, and I also need to figure out, there's some chapters that have been written before, but the words are kind of blurry and I can't figure out what happened there. Let's rewrite it and figure out what did happen there. And when you do that, I feel like it really empowers you to say, I know I've got a voice, but I don't know how to use it yet. Like, I know autonomy is important. My self-reflection is important, but I don't know how to do anything yet. I just feel like I'm just sitting here kind of twiddling my thumbs, waiting. Where do we go from here? Like, what are some of the things that you've found in finding the right words or the right emotions or the right experiences that have given you that sense of saying, I am truly going from just sitting still, kind of waiting for the next stage, to I am internally rewriting my narrative. I'm writing a book, and it's a goddamn epic. This is an absolute beautiful, legendary book of Megan's life in your mind, and then coming out and where we can see it. What are the things that help you with your internal narrative to just shine with joy and peace, and with the self-compassion stuff, but also just all the creativity and just saying, I am truly alive and I love it?
So I hear, I always think in terms of my own modalities and how I work through this stuff. And so again, that's coming back to internal family systems. Like when you're saying that, you're reconnecting to your authentic self. And when you're in self energy, you're curious, you're compassionate, you're calm, you're connected, you're courageous, you're all of these things. And I think writing is huge for that. I'm big into journaling. I've been into journaling since the prayer journal. Okay. Like I had to move through writing letters to God to start writing letters to myself and writing letters to my inner wisdom, or just writing about what was going on. But I think that for every person, it does look a little bit different. But I think what's going to help clue you in, if you're on that path of connecting to your authentic self, is what settings and what activities do you feel calm in and connected in and have curiosity in? For some people, that's reading. And I'm not talking about reading self-development books. I'm talking about even reading fiction. Like, fiction is huge for me too, because introduces me to characters who are living in different ways and having different experiences, and you're inside their heads. And so that can be huge for people. Creativity and art is another huge one for people, and you're exercising a different part of your brain too, where the creative side of your brain is very closely connected to emotion. And so if you can tap into creativity, you're allowing emotion to move through, and you're allowing yourself to really connect with that authentic self as well. I think a lot of people, and you may have been alluding some of it to this too, feel a really big drive to right the wrongs that they've experienced. And, that they have a part of them that seeks justice. Once justice that was oriented towards righteousness or towards, the things that we were taught to do, evangelizing and whatnot, is now sort of oriented towards social justice issues, or bringing around awareness about what the harms of the religious groups that we were indoctrinated into. And that can be very empowering for people. I just try to have people be cautious about that, because it can bypass the healing process. And now you're just in action mode and you're trying to recover, but you're still being fueled by the underlying trauma. And so I think when it comes to rewriting the internal narrative and reconnecting with your authentic self, it's those things that are not as action oriented towards a specific goal. It really is just reconnecting with yourself.
I love it. Could I share an example of something that recently I think falls into some of these categories? Are you familiar with the Star Wars show Andor?
No, I'm not.
I highly recommend at least this clip. I'll include a link beneath the video for anyone that wants to see it. But Andor is basically about this season before the rebellion against the Empire is really fully formed. It's just like random people who are doing things that are basically illegal, from the Empire's perspective, but they're getting organized very quietly, very stealthily. And there's this woman. She becomes a big part of the Star Wars series later. Her name is Mon Mothma. She's a very famous politician. She's very wealthy, has a daughter, and in this, she's basically got a very public life where everyone thinks she's doing the normal thing and in support of the Empire. But secretly, she's actually shoveling money over to the rebellion, and her life is about to change. She is about to give it all up. She's going to have to go to a different planet to join the army there. And this sort of last hurrah moment, her daughter is at her wedding. Her daughter's at marriageable age and is getting married there. And it's just because they're wealthy beyond wealth. It's a huge deal. I mean, a massive, massive party. At the very end of the wedding, they have what I would consider, I may be wrong on this, but it's like a rave dance. I mean, everyone is they're not even like dancing to a rhythm or to a specific pattern. They're just like going crazy. And the music is fantastic. And this lady's looking at this, knowing within hours or days, she's literally going to have to walk away from all of it and never see it again, never see her own daughter's face again, never see her husband again. And she gets a little bit tipsy and she just goes at it and she dances her heart out. And I mean to tell you, I looked at that and I thought, I need that. I need to dance like nobody's watching. I need to dance like my life depends on it. And it really is crazy, but that, as much as I wasn't actually doing it, it was really healing to see that. And I'll share it for anyone that doesn't know what I'm talking about. But it's amazing. I think even something like dancing, especially if it's not like the prescribed, foxtrot, dance here, do all these little rules, but you just let your body go. And it's amazing when you see people that went through maybe all the rules of dancing and know how to dance really well, but now they're at the spot where they can break all the rules and they can just be themselves. I envy that and I want that, because I feel like in some ways that's such a great metaphor. The fact that it's honestly, for a lot of us, it's time to get into the rave. Start dancing. Like, if you're not going to do it now, when are you going to do it? If you're not going to dance like nobody's looking, your life's passing you by and the clock is ticking. Like, do it. And yeah, I think for a lot of us, it will be the most healing thing in the world to just figure out a way to literally or metaphorically dance your heart out,
Yes. And have you heard of ecstatic dance?
I have not. This might fall in that category, but I've not.
Yeah, that's what that is. That's what you're describing is you're just going and you're not following a certain type of dance or, certain steps. You're allowing your body to respond to the music within a group of people. You may choose to dance with other people. You may choose to dance off on your own, but that is a nervous system recovery tool that people can use too. So ecstatic dance, and they have them all over.
I will definitely need to be looking that up as soon as my kiddos give me a few minutes of time.
Yeah.
Well, I know we've talked through a lot. I did want to make sure that, number one, we talk through anything else that is on your mind, but also want to make sure that you have a chance to sort of talk through what you do for a living in terms of offering people the support of a counselor, therapist, but also what you do with the larger group, the community. So if you could tell us more about what that world is like and how people can connect with you.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going into summer of 2025. So I am accepting new one-on-one, I call them coaching clients, even though I'm a therapist. That is my training. That is my background. I've been a therapist for over 13 years now. Because of state licensure issues and things like that, it's under the umbrella of coaching, not therapy. So I am accepting new coaching clients. I have it broken down into two categories, and people can move back and forth between the two. The first is shorter 45-minute cognitive processing sessions. So this is when we stay in the prefrontal cortex and we're just sort of working through logically what's happened, trying to make sense of things, talking about certain relationships, who we may need to set boundaries with, those kinds of things, like figuring things out. It's more problem solving. And then there's the longer 75-minute nervous system recovery sessions. And that's where I will bring out all the tools of EMDR, brain spotting, internal family systems, somatic experiencing. That is where we're getting to that trauma that's stored in those deeper brain regions and moving it through. We need the longer session because you have sort of setup time and you have closure time, and then you have the bulk of the work that's in between. And both of those are really important for people to be able to have. I would say with the nervous system recovery is going to be an essential component of really healing some of those underlying internalized beliefs, or if you're having the chronic health issues or you're having a disconnect from your body or your emotions, that's how you access it, is through the nervous system recovery work. And then something I recently launched at the beginning of May, which has been very exciting, is my religious harm recovery membership community. And this is great for folks who want to connect with others in a deeper way, who are on a similar journey. So I have ex-evangelicals, I have ex-Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witness. So that kind of like a wide range of backgrounds, but all under this umbrella of culty religions or high control religions. And I offer every other week, we go deep in a live session on a topic, and the topics are in series. So right now the series is reconnecting with your body, and it's every other Friday. And we do a teaching portion where I will teach on the topic. It has a slide deck. It's kind of like a presentation. People will engage during that time. We'll have a discussion portion. And then I walk people through integrative practices. So we did like a body scan, and there's different integrative practices with the nervous system that we actually incorporate as part of those live sessions. And then everything is recorded separately and uploaded for people who aren't able to be there live to still have access to the teaching and the resources. And then we also do a book club. So once a month we do a book club related to perhaps deconstruction. So we're doing When Religion Hurts You by Dr. Laura Anderson is our first one. That's on June 3rd. We're doing Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents in July. And so kind of either trauma, mental health recovery, if not specific to religion, then we kind of talk about how it connects to religion in the book club. And then there's forums, there's people can chat back and forth, there's chat threads, there's posts. So it's pretty holistic, where you can kind of dip in and out as much as you want or as little as you want, but a lot of value in different ways, depending on what you're looking for.
Is it like through a website or through Facebook, or like what is the main way we would interact with it?
So the platform I use is Circle. So it's specifically designed to host these membership communities, and it's very clean and streamlined. You can join the live meetings right through the platform, whether it's on your phone or on your computer. You get reminders, you get like weekly emails sort of summarizing everything. So everything's housed in this one platform, which is pretty beautiful ecosystem. I've really enjoyed setting it up and using it actually. So it's pretty awesome. And one thing that tends to be or is a benefit for my clients now is anybody who's actively working with me gets free access to the membership. And then, they can have support with me one-on-one and then access all of these other resources to kind of supplement their recovery on the side too.
I love it. That's awesome. I think it's probably a given, that a lot of us honestly feel very, very alone in this journey. And, I've talked before and plugged the religious trauma, the recovering from religion group, which people can call and talk to someone anonymous 24/7, if you're in a place where it's unsafe to talk about your deconversion. Groups like that are great, but they're going to be, a phone call with a stranger. For a lot of people, that's a good starting point, but you need to get into community, get plugged in. And a group like yours is a great place because at that point, that whole feeling of I'm alone and no one else knows what I'm going through, it begins to change radically. And, you can maybe even build some friends that are going to be your friends for life. Who knows? But at least you feel like you're not alone in this journey. And it's existentially, I think, when you get into nihilism, as I have, just there's an inherent loneliness that changes, it becomes part of your worldview. And although I think nihilism is probably accurate in the sense of reflecting reality, you can't live there, and you gotta get plugged in. You will get so alone so fast, and it's just like you gotta find community as quick as you can, especially if you're in the newer part of this journey. So I just highly encourage people to consider what you're saying, because we need people like you to be linchpins for our communities, because it makes such a difference. And I hope that whether whoever's listening, I hope you're not alone in this. I know there's going to be some people out there that are veterans. They've been through this many times, and they're just here to support us. But other people are truly brand new, and this stuff is all hitting them hard. And to know it's going to get better. It's going to get better. It's going to take a minute, but it's going to get better. And we're so glad you're here, and we definitely care about you. So please take good care of yourself. Please take good care of yourselves, and let us know what we can do to be helpful in your journey, because it's a hard journey without friends. It really is.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of the reason I started it, is because people were reaching out and really craving that connection with others, because we lose our community, right? A lot of times when we leave the religion, we lose a lot of friends. We sometimes lose our family. So we need to rebuild. And for people who maybe don't have the financial wherewithal to invest in the membership, I do have a free Facebook group that has about 1,400 people in it right now. And I keep it pretty streamlined at this point. So it's specifically kind of asking questions, getting feedback, getting support. It's not a bunch of memes or funny stuff or things that are kind of cluttering up the platform. It's really pretty authentic, genuine connection. That is a free resource that people are welcome to join.
Awesome. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Well, I know I've thrown a lot of questions at you today. Before we wrap up, was there anything else on your mind that you wanted to add, and then we'll wrap up?
I think that was it. I think it's been pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, awesome. I'm looking forward to the next set of topics we come up with. I'm sure there'll be some more down the line here. But for our second interview, we'll say thank you so much. Everyone, we've been speaking with Megan von Fricken. I'll have a whole bunch of links. A lot more than I started with. I'll have even more that we talked about here, but I have a whole bunch of links. Please go like and subscribe and check out her website, her membership, and so forth. We would love for you to get connected there. But Megan, it's so good to hear your story and your insights. Thank you so much for being a part of my platform as well. But great to have you back again today.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for having me and for all the work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Have a great day.